Hello and welcome to CineMaine, where we look at films that are connected to Maine, whether they be set in Maine, filmed in Maine, or have any other loose connections to the state of Maine. With the first new Star Wars film in 7 years being out this month, The Mandalorian and Grogu, I figured it was time for me to review a Star Wars film. Going back to the chronological beginning, well, cinematically anyway, The Phantom Menace, the first of the prequel trilogy written and directed by George Lucas. Normally I would describe the film's premise before delving into its connections to Maine, but I'm actually gonna skip that this time because, well, this is one of those movies I feel like everyone and their uncle has already seen by this point. And on top of that, this film's basic plot is kinda difficult to sum up. I'll get into why in a little bit, but for now, I just want to address the elephant in the room. Because I'm sure you're probably thinking, Star Wars doesn't connect to Maine, you giblet head. It's in a galaxy far, far away on planets with fancy names like Coruscant or Tatooine. And yeah, obviously Star Wars has never been set in Maine. And the film itself was filmed all over the place, such as Tunisia for the Tatooine scenes, the Italian royal palace of Caserta being used for the interior of the Naboo Palace, and the rest of the film being shot in England. Hertfordshire being used for Naboo's forest, with everything else being shot on sound stages at Leavesden Film Studios. So nothing was filmed in Maine either. But if you've seen my Minority Report review, you probably already know the one incredibly loose way The Phantom Menace does connect to Maine. It's gonna sound strange at first, but believe it or not, it is through the composer of the film's musical score. Arguably the biggest name in film scores in cinematic history, John Williams. While he primarily grew up in New York, he did spend plenty of summers in Bangor as a child, spending them with his grandparents on his father's side who ran a department store there. Williams himself has described his own father as being a Maine man when talking about his own childhood. I've even heard it speculated that he might have learned how to play piano during the time he spent with his grandparents in Bangor growing up. I unfortunately can't confirm or deny this, as I couldn't find anything directly clarifying so one way or the other. But I would like to think that's true, because if so, that would honestly be really cool. Needless to say, one of the film's best aspects is the film's musical score. Star Wars is known for having incredible music whenever the franchise is at its best, worst, or somewhere in between. And this film is no exception. The most memorable piece of music this particular movie has given us is Duel of the Fates, Darth Maul's theme, which if I'm not mistaken is the first piece of music from Star Wars to utilize a choir on top of an orchestra, which was added to make the piece even more epic. To say that I get chills every time I hear this would be an understatement. It's become a very popular piece among Star Wars fans, later being reused in numerous Star Wars video games, along with an occasional spoof, and was even initially planned on being used as the namesake for Episode 9 before J.J. Abrams was brought back on board to direct that film. It was also the only piece of classical music that ever had a TRL debut on MTV, which is pretty impressive. I am aware of how loose of a connection to Maine this all is. So loose that I can only rate this film half a chickadee out of 5 when it comes to its main connections. But honestly, Star Wars was such a huge part of my childhood, and played such a huge role in shaping my passion for film at a young age, that if I'm able to find a main connection in Star Wars, no matter how loose it may be, it's gonna make me want to talk about Star Wars on this channel if I can. I'm sure it would make a lot more sense to review the original film first, since John Williams also scored that film, and we wouldn't even have this big franchise if it wasn't for that movie. But I decided to look at The Phantom Menace first, considering that next year that film is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary. Wait a minute. That movie's turning 50? But it's as old as Gerard Way. What? No, that can't be. It probably seems redundant for anyone to review this film anymore, since it feels like everyone's already said everything there is to be said about this film. Many critics have already given their own thoughts on this film, and Red Letter Media's review in particular, with Harry S. Plunkett, is arguably the Phantom Menace review to end all Phantom Menace reviews, considering that they nailed the majority of this movie's issues beautifully. But I've noticed many critics who've already reviewed this film share something in common with each other that I don't share with them. They all remember when this film first came out. They also remember a time when only the original trilogy existed. So they actually remember how the hype for this film was so immense that people would actually camp outside of movie theaters for days, weeks even, in anticipation to be the first in line to see it. There's a late 2000s comedy called Fanboys, which dealt with a group of Star Wars fans who snuck into Skywalker Ranch in the hopes that their dying friend would get to see the film early in case he didn't make it to May '99. It did a good job commenting on how unprecedented the hype was surrounding this film when it came out, which is a period of time I personally have no memory of whatsoever. Granted, I was alive when this film came out, but I was only 2 years old. So while I remember 1999 a little bit, I mostly remember spending time with my family, going to our local park, and watching Nick Jr. among other things 2-year-olds did at the time. But I don't remember the hype that was surrounding this film when it came out. In fact, my earliest memory with Star Wars at all is with this exact film, via watching it for the first time when we got it on DVD in about 2001, I think. Even at such a young age, I still remember having never seen anything like it beforehand. And I feel like this film, along with the other 2 prequels, were how a lot of people my age first discovered Star Wars. So growing up, it would always feel weird hearing adults crap on these films and say that they ruined their childhood, when my friends and I enjoyed these movies every bit as much as the films in the original trilogy. But I'm in my late 20s now. So is it possible that now after all these years I finally understand where the haters are coming from? Or are there enough good things here that I'm able to understand why the film has gotten a bit of a reappraisal in recent years?
Yes.
On the one hand, this movie is far from perfect. Many of my issues with it seem to be the same issues most people have. The stiff characterization, the fact that Naboo's civilization apparently elects queens, along with the fact that their queen is 14 years old, the fact that it's unclear who the film's main character is supposed to be, the numerous and blatant stereotypes the film depicts, the film having so many scenes of political talks that half the time it feels more like intergalactic C-SPAN than it does a Star Wars movie, the fact that Anakin Skywalker, the kid who's supposed to grow up to be Darth Vader, was apparently born from an immaculate conception. Yeah, that to me is especially really stupid. Along with the fact that the dialogue is either cringy,
Are you an angel? What?
or just straight up wooden. Yet weirdly enough, I noticed some issues with this movie that I'm not entirely sure other people have brought up yet or not. I'll start off with the midichlorians. This seems to be the one aspect of the film that gets the most hate, and I can understand why. It's a lame attempt at trying to explain how the Force works. Even though the way it's explained to the audience sounds really stupid, and most people, including myself, are completely fine with not knowing how the Force works. If anything, trying to explain how it works kinda gets rid of the mystique or the appeal that the Force has to viewers. But that's something a lot of people have pointed out already. There are 2 more issues that I don't think anyone has pointed out yet. We all know that if someone has enough of them in their blood, it means they're in tune with the Force. The midichlorians are first mentioned nearly 40 minutes into the film when Qui-Gon Jinn calls his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell him that this kid he met, Anakin Skywalker, has a lot of them in his blood. The first problem is that the movie waits another hour before even bothering to explain to the audience what midichlorians even are. They're getting ready to leave Coruscant and Anakin just randomly asks Qui-Gon what midichlorians are. It's almost like the movie's going, oh, right, I forgot to explain that part. Okay, so, and to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if at this point during the screenwriting process, George Lucas just realized he forgot to explain it earlier and decided to include this scene to finally get that out of the way because, and this is also the reason the basic plot synopsis feels hard to sum up, which is due to the fact that this film is so fast-paced and throws so much exposition and plot at you that it becomes pretty easy to miss certain details after a while. Not enough time is spent bothering to try and develop the characters or let us really get to know what they're like. It's mostly just trying to get them to go from point A to point B. But again, I'm not the first person to point that out. And there's still another issue that I have with the midichlorians as well. Qui-Gon's ship gets damaged and requires landing on Tatooine in order to get a new part to replace it. This is what leads to him meeting the kid who will grow up to be Darth Vader, along with his mother. These 3 have literally met that very day, and later that night, Qui-Gon takes her son into the room alone with him so he can take some of his blood.
Dude!
Yeah, if that doesn't sound unhinged to you, I don't know what will. And look, I get that Qui-Gon needs a sample of his blood to check his metachlorine count, but honestly, if some stranger tried to take my kid into another room so he could take some of their blood, I'd be going all Jack Reacher on them almost instantly. I'm sorry, but everyone complains about the metachlorians themselves, yet no one is creeped out by this guy who's basically a stranger trying to take some of this kid's blood? This is really concerning behavior. It makes the Jedi look a little unhinged, as do some other parts of this movie. Take Qui-Gon, for example. I mentioned earlier that he and Obi-Wan stop on Tatooine to replace a part of their ship. Apparently, they don't have enough money to pay for it yet. Qui-Gon tries using Jedi mind tricks on the shop owner, but that ends up backfiring, as Watto literally says to him that only money works on him, while Jedi mind tricks apparently don't. But before I can question how that works, Qui-Gon decides to bet on a sporting event.
Is it a crime to bet on sporting events?
Not for a Jedi. It gets even weirder. He makes a bet with a character who is a Jewish stereotype, someone who also apparently owns Anakin and his mom. Yeah, they're his slaves. I didn't make that up. That's in the movie. And Qui-Gon bets that if the child wins the sporting event, then he'll be freed from slavery, which does end up happening since Anakin wins the pod race. There is actually a really cool line Qui-Gon has here in response.
Whenever you gamble, my friend, eventually you lose.
Too bad Watto apparently owes money to Jabba the Hutt, which as we all know is the Star Wars equivalent of owing the Mafia money.
I owed the Mafia money.
Was George Lucas possessed by Frank Reynolds when he wrote this? This feels like something he'd come up with. I'll admit there's an incredibly sick part of me that finds this unintentionally funny, but it gets kinda sad from there. Qui-Gon's able to free Anakin out of slavery, but not his mother. In fact, he actually ends up causing Anakin and his mother to be separated so that he can take Anakin to Coruscant to convince the Jedi Council to train him in the ways of the Force. Why can't his mom just go to Coruscant with him? Well, apparently whenever Jedi sense the Force in very young kids, they separate them from their families at an early age. Yeah, for whatever reason, they don't want these kids having contact with their families. I guess this is so they'll be less likely to have familial attachments or something, but that still seems messed up to me. In a depressing way. And it makes the Jedi look a little sketchy. Not to mention that when Anakin is talking with the Jedi Council on Coruscant, he makes it clear that he feels bad because he feels like he's leaving his mother behind. Yoda's response is one we all remember. I sense fear in you. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Yeah, way to turn things from 0 to 100 really quick there, guy. Not to mention that this is quite a generalization. Disappointment can also lead to anger. Plus, fear can lead to other things too, like confusion or sadness, which are all normal things for Anakin to experience considering that he's a 9-year-old who's never been apart from his family before and he doesn't know if he'll ever see her again. Anyone in his situation would feel that way, so maybe it's best not to put this in his head. The Council doesn't want to train Anakin, both for Yoda's reasoning and the fact that they think he's too old to start training. So Qui-Gon insists on training the boy himself. He really believes that Anakin is the chosen one to bring balance to the Force.
I love the chosen one. Loving him is lots of fun. We love the chosen one.
The only other thing that's already been talked about to death that I'll touch on briefly is Jar Jar Binks. Everyone's already pointed out how annoying this character is, and I totally agree with that. With that said, I do not blame the actor for that. And I'm glad he finally got to play somebody cool in the Star Wars universe a few years ago. And upon rewatching this film for this review, I started to notice something about this aspect of the film that I'm not sure other people have realized yet. I noticed a good chunk of the time, whenever the film is trying to move the story forward, more often than not the scene will be interrupted by him doing something stupid. What makes this even more frustrating is half the time a character will tell him not to do something he obviously shouldn't do, but he ends up doing it anyway, causing really lame hijinks to ensue. It's kinda like the film's own attention span is getting so short with itself that it'll be all like, they're just talking about trade routes, this is boring, who cares? Look at Jar Jar, look at him and laugh! But in reality, the audience is just all like,
But TV, be more funny.
And as everyone else has also pointed out, the one useful thing he does is escort Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan into and out of the underwater city where the Gungans live. And this is where the best aspects of the movie start to come in. I know this film is 27 years old now, and a lot of the CGI looks a little dated, but my god is this film still amazing to look at. I know that sounds a little shallow, but keep in mind, this is still a sci-fi fantasy. So having incredible visuals, and world building that feels, for lack of a better term, out of this world, is quite important when it comes to helping your film stand out. I know most people find the visuals here less impressive compared to the visuals in the original trilogy, since this film did rely on CGI rather heavily, but I still remember having never seen anything like this before when I saw this film for the first time quarter of a century ago, and the visuals still look incredible to me all these years later. I also like the vast variety of landscapes that we see on different planets. Naboo, of course, feels very Mediterranean. Tatooine, surprise to no one, still feels like the desert. Coruscant feels like a giant city, but my personal favorite is the underwater city, the home of the Gungans. Not only does this place remind me of one of my all-time favorite animated films, but I can't really think of any locations in the original trilogy that feel even remotely similar to this place. So it's nice to see this film try to mix things up a bit and not try to be too derivative of the films that came before it. Some of the little details are cool too, like the underwater ship that looks modeled after a manta ray. I also like the character designs of the Gungans themselves, and I can tell Brian Blessed must have had fun hamming it up as the Gungan leader, Boss Nass. And believe it or not, Jar Jar's original design looks a lot worse than what we see in the final cut. Yes, this character could have been worse. I also find the idea rather haunting. The pod racing sequence also adds to the world building. I've heard both good and bad things said about this part of the film, and yeah, the story does come to a halt just so we can watch intergalactic NASCAR, but again, we never had anything quite like this in the original trilogy, and creating a new sport that exists within the universe does add to the world building. And at least I can follow this, unlike Quidditch. I know it's obviously just here to set up video games, but the pod racing arcade game was one of my favorite arcade games growing up. I even got this game for the Dreamcast years later, and it's still a lot of fun. There are still some confusing aspects, like how Anakin suddenly goes from having never finished a pod race before, to suddenly being the only racer to finish the race that Qui-Gon bets on, along with the fact that fellow pod racer Sebulba has a rivalry with him, despite the fact that Anakin is 9 while Sebulba is a full-grown adult, but I can get over both of those things fine. Along with the fact that Anakin apparently found and rebuilt C-3PO, which, again, is something I've heard lots of people complain about, and I'm not really sure why. And I've never even liked C-3PO, yet even I find myself asking, what am I missing? Whenever I see this. I'll also admit that despite the dialogue being wooden, and the direction given to the actors being kinda weak, there are two standout performances here. Ewan McGregor is perfect as a young Obi-Wan. You can tell he really put in the effort to channel Alec Guinness from the original films, and it's easy to see this guy turning out to be that version of Obi-Wan down the line. It's just a shame that he's not as prominently featured here as he is in the next two films. Ray Park is also great as Darth Maul. This character has become such a favorite that they literally decided to bring him back from the dead for Star Wars Rebels and give this character his own show recently, and I can totally see why. His design is awesome, they know how to make him look intimidating, his theme music is epic, he apparently never blinks when he's on screen, and at the risk of beating another dead horse, his stunt work is incredible. I also got a kick out of learning that his voice was dubbed over by Peter Serafinowicz, who really makes the character's voice sound chilling. Quite the contrast to his hilarious role in Spy. Pretty much the best part of the movie is the section of the climax that has him fighting Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. There are parts of the sequence that make it feel like a video game boss, such as these doors that close and open every few seconds, along with the location they're fighting in. And it's a lot flashier than the lightsaber fights we saw in the original trilogy. But again, that's kinda part of the fun. The lightsaber fighting and stunts are amazing, and there are numerous shots here that look larger than life. The part where Obi-Wan uses the Force to reach for his lightsaber, get himself out of the ventilation tube, and then splits Darth Maul in half before he falls down the ventilation tube, gives me chills every time.
Finish him! Fatality.
The climax itself, unfortunately, does have a lot of things going on, and it's still not without stupid moments like...
We're being sealed in a dome!
Or how Anakin accidentally gets himself into the space battle, which admittedly feels a little derivative of A New Hope's climax, along with Jar Jar's bumbling wackiness coincidentally helping the Gungans win their battle. Talk about a comedy of errors. But despite all that, I still found this part of the film to be a lot of fun. I'm sure this is yet another section that's clearly meant to set up more video games, and while I've never played Battle for Naboo, I am finding myself curious to check that game out. I have to admit that the energy balls that the Gungans throw at the droids are really cool. And lastly, there are a couple other unintentionally funny things. It is pretty funny seeing Elizabeth Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean talk to these guys about trade routes of all things. And if you look closely in one of the Senate meetings, apparently E.T.'s species is there? I guess that means technically this is a Star Wars movie now?
I don't know.
Overall, this movie is heavily flawed, but I still enjoy it despite its many flaws. It's the kind of film where every time I watch it, I feel like a kid again. The stuff about it that is genuinely good keeps me coming back over and over, but the stuff that everyone did turn out to be right about is at least bad in a manner that's interesting to look over. To me, the worst thing a Star Wars movie or show can be is boring. And this movie as a whole isn't quite like that for me. It's just kinda all over the place. I guess if you're someone who just hates Star Wars, this is an easy skip. If you're someone who's never seen Star Wars at all, I am genuinely curious to hear what you have to say. A lot of adults were disappointed by this film when it first came out, but kids who grew up with it still enjoy it years later for what it is. If I were to guess on how anyone who's uninitiated with Star Wars would react, my guess is that they'd find this film to be too dense with plot to really get into it. But if you're someone my age who remembers having a lot of fun with this film as a kid, chances are it might not hold up nearly as well in some areas, but there's enough fascinating stuff here that I'd say it's worth traveling back to a galaxy far, far away. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for more vids, along with some shorts every now and then. And be sure to check out CineMaine's website, and be on the lookout for future CineMaine content.